In the summer of 1941, the world held its breath. Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history, was unleashed. Over 3 million German soldiers surged across the Soviet border, a tide of steel and fire aimed at the heart of a nation. Hitler's blitzkrieg had conquered most of Europe, and now he believed the Soviet Union would crumble in a matter of weeks. Initially, his confidence seemed justified. The German war machine pushed relentlessly eastward, capturing vast territories and millions of soldiers. The road to Moscow seemed wide open, but as the initial shock wore off, the Soviet Union did not collapse. Instead, it stiffened its resolve. The vastness of the country, its immense population, and its brutal winters began to slow the German advance. By 1942, the war on the Eastern Front had evolved from a lightning campaign into a grinding war of attrition. Hitler, frustrated by the stalemate before Moscow, shifted his focus south. He needed resources, specifically the rich oil fields of the Caucasus, and standing in his way, guarding the path to the oil and bearing the name of his arch-nemesis, was a city on the Volga River, Stalingrad. Stalingrad was more than just a name. It was a vital industrial hub and a critical transport artery. Control of the city meant control of the Volga River, which would sever the Soviet Union's southern supply lines and cripple its war economy. For Hitler, capturing Stalingrad was a strategic necessity and a massive propaganda victory. For Stalin, holding it was a matter of survival. The stage was set for a clash of titans, a battle that would become a symbol of unimaginable ferocity and sacrifice. In late August 1942, the German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. What followed was an inferno. The Luftwaffe unleashed a bombing campaign of unprecedented scale, dropping over 1,000 tons of explosives on the city in just 48 hours. Stalingrad was reduced to a sea of fire and rubble. But from the ruins, a new kind of warfare was born. The battle moved from the open plains into the twisted labyrinth of the shattered city. Every collapsed building, every factory floor, every sewer tunnel became a fortress. This was no longer a war of grand maneuvers. It was a close-quarters struggle for survival. Soldiers called it Rettenkrieg, the Rat War. Life was measured in meters, not kilometers. A single street could change hands a dozen times in a day. The main grain elevator, a massive concrete silo, was defended by a handful of Soviet soldiers who held out for days against overwhelming German assaults. At the Red October steel factory and the Barakadi arms factory, workers downed their tools and picked up rifles, fighting side by side with soldiers in the very workshops where they had once built tanks. The fighting was personal and brutal. Snipers became legendary figures, dueling each other from shattered windows and piles of debris. The most famous, Vasily Zaitsev, became a symbol of Soviet defiance, a ghost in the ruins stalking his prey. As weeks turned into months, the city was pulverized into dust, but the defense never broke. The Soviet 62nd Army, led by the indomitable General Vasily Zhukov, clung to a narrow strip of land along the western bank of the Volga, supplied by night under constant German artillery fire. Zhukov's motto was simple: there is no land for us beyond the Volga. Then, winter arrived. Not just any winter, but a classic Russian winter force of nature as deadly as any army. Temperatures plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius. German soldiers, still in their summer uniforms, began to freeze. Their equipment failed, engines wouldn't start, and frostbite claimed more men than combat. While the Germans shivered and starved in the ruins they had created, the Soviet High Command was preparing a On November 19, 1942, under the cover of a blinding snowstorm, Marshal Georgy Zhukov launched Operation Uranus. 2 massive Soviet pincers slammed into the weak Romanian and Italian flanks of the German army group. The attack was swift and devastating. Within 4 days, the jaws of the trap snapped shut. The entire German Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, was encircled, cut off from all supplies inside the city they had fought so hard to conquer. Hitler, in a fatal display of arrogance, forbade General Paulus from attempting a breakout. He promised to supply the trapped army by air, but the airlift was a catastrophic failure. The Luftwaffe was exhausted and outmatched, and the icy conditions made flying treacherous. Instead of the 500 tons of supplies needed daily, the Sixth Army received a mere fraction. The soldiers inside the Kessel, or cauldron, were doomed. Hunger became their greatest enemy. They ate their horses, then the dogs and cats, and then resorted to gnawing on leather belts. Ammunition ran low, medical supplies vanished, and thousands succumbed to starvation, disease, and the relentless cold. The suffering was immense, not just for the soldiers, but for the civilians still trapped in the city. They huddled in basements, surviving on scraps, caught in the crossfire of a battle that had consumed their world. Yet, even in the depths of this despair, the Soviet defense held firm, tightening the noose around the starving German army. The final Soviet offensive, Operation Ring, began in January 1943. It was a grim, methodical process of carving the German pocket into smaller and smaller pieces. On January 31, 1943, with his headquarters in the basement of a ruined department store, a newly promoted Field Marshal Paulus surrendered. Hitler had expected him to fight to the last man, but Paulus chose to save the lives of his remaining soldiers. Over the next few days, the last pockets of German resistance fell silent. Of the nearly 300,000 soldiers of the Sixth Army trapped in the cauldron, only about 91,000 were left to surrender, and of those, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The human cost of Stalingrad was staggering. The battle lasted just over 5 months, but in that time, it is estimated that nearly 2 million people, soldiers and civilians, were killed, wounded, or captured. The city itself was utterly annihilated, a ghost town of skeletal buildings and frozen bodies. But its sacrifice was not in vain. The defeat at Stalingrad was a turning point. It was the first time the Nazi war machine had been decisively stopped and thrown back. The myth of German invincibility was shattered forever. For the Soviet Union, it was a profound, soul-stirring victory that boosted national morale and proved they could defeat the invaders. From Stalingrad onward, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front belonged to the Red Army. They began the long, bloody march westward, a march that would end 2 years later in the ruins of Berlin. Stalingrad was more than a battle. It was the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. It was the crucible in which the tide of the Second World War was irrevocably turned. Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. The story of Stalingrad is a powerful reminder of human resilience and the immense cost of war. If you found this video insightful, please give it a like, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's most pivotal moments. We'll see you in the next one.